Dialogues, a podcast of the She Is Still Dope Network. I'm your host, LJ Fountain, and I am proud to be joined today by an amazing woman, Crissy Wilson, and we're going to be discussing one of those difficult topics. I call it I Am My Brother's Keeper. And in light of that, I want to always add that while it is the She Is Still Dope network, I always say she is still dope and so is he. In order for us to have the humble dialogues, it's going to take all of us. So I'm proud to have Crissy here with me. And we may be a little clunky today just because of some tech challenges, but tech challenges or no, we're here for you. And I hope you can sit back for the next 30 minutes and enjoy this discussion. Part one, I am my brother's keeper.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. It's my pleasure to be here because actually it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I don't get much opportunities to talk about my dear brother, Gene. I am my brother's keeper. Um, when you asked me to do this, a God had been speaking that morning to me. He said, "Stay humble, stay humble." I'm like, okay. And then you came and said, "I have a podcast. It's called Humble Dialogues." I don't know if you noticed that I started smiling immediately because God is that type of person that He always lets you know that it's Him, and He always leads you where you need to be going. So even before you said what you wanted me to do, it was a yes. Say humble dialogues, and this. And so anyway, I am my brother's keeper. I'd like to talk about the me and my brother Gene. That would be my first topic. Um, I I am 17 years younger than my brother. I'm the baby.
Because are grateful our amazing producer is trying to keep up with you and me. And so I'm going to try not to talk over you because what you have to say is so important. But before you go in and describe and talk about your amazing relationship, because I do want to do a part one and part two of I Am My Brother's Keeper, tell us a little bit about you. Tell the people who are listening and watching to this because the She Is Still Network appears many places for people who are listening, for people who are watching. I want them to get to know you a little bit. Talk to us a little bit about who you are. Tell me a little bit about your life's work. And I don't mean human thought processes around jobs, although, quite frankly, I think you're a pretty brilliant woman. And I think people should get to know this brilliant woman. But I really would like them to also get to know that humble woman. So it's interesting because you're brilliantly humble and humbly brilliant. So tell us a little about your life's work before you go into this amazing special relationship that God brought into your life. And for the producer, I'm turning it over to Crissy now.
Wow, I hadn't prepared that part. It wasn't going to be so much about me. And if I finish talking about my brother, you will find out how God took me to that place. Um, I, I came to know Christ at an early age, but I was very religious and I was so disenfranchised with Christianity. As a matter of fact, I was just going to church to play the music. I was hardly listening to the sermons because I could recite them by heart. They were so rote. Testimonies were so rote that I was so bored that I had to drag myself into the services. I would balance my checkbook while they were preaching, that sort of thing, until God led me to a place where where He tore me all apart. Took me to a Reformation church where He undid the religiosity in me and dealt with my heart issues and took away the things that posture that I had before people that wasn't a humble position posture before God. And God said that no man shall glory in his sight. So I'm glad He did this to me before I went to see God. That God undid all the labels that I had in religion. someone asked me in what capacity was I in my new church, and I said I'm a member. In my other church, I did everything, you name it. I had that title, except pastor. And then I came to Zion. I did nothing. I didn't even play the piano. They had organists and pianists, and they didn't need me. So I did. I just was there to learn for many years. And then I realized, looking back on my journey, that that's what Christ did with his disciples. Because you're born again because you know about him, but you're only when you continue in him. He said, "You're my disciple indeed." And I didn't realize that I had just gotten saved and that was it. That I hadn't grown spiritually at all. So my journey was one of unraveling and coming to know Christ for real made me wonder if I was ever really saved. And I know that I was, but I wasn't ready to go before God. And I think that's what our life processes are, to make us ready to go before God. That's pretty much, unless you want me to say anything else about me, that's pretty much um, it. That's where I am religiously. It changed from religiosity to relational. I now have a personal relationship with Christ. He's able to correct me when I'm acting like something that's coming from my flesh and not from my spirit. He's able to. I had understood. I understand what the difference is now.
Producer, I'm hoping that many people who have never been to church are able to are going to hear part of this, or some people who have been to church and who have been hurt within the church, that something happens in their heart and they at least hear your words. Some of your words, however, may be words people don't understand. And I will tell you because even the terminology saved, for people who either have been in the church and been hurt deeply in the institution of church, um, and others, those are words that for them that can be challenging. Can you hear me, Chrissy? I want to make sure you can hear me. You're messing with your earphones, so can you hear me, Chrissy? So
Yes, I can.
thank you. So here's the thing. Can you share partly what you just shared in your journey, but you went from this religious structure, the rules, what to do, what role to play, to relationship. And I think that's what I hear you saying, like which I can tell you for a lot of my friends, um, they relate to relationship and not to rules. And by entering, even reformation might throw someone off, that term reformation. What does that mean? How does someone who has not been introduced to God, the God we know, the God who is a relationship God, how do you talk with someone in a way that breaks it down? And I'm saying that because I believe it will lead us to your story, of I Am My Brother's Keeper, part one and part two. You you were changed in many ways. While you went to work every day and did your thing and raised your family, and you were, an ordinary person living. How does that work out in a relationship with God?
Okay. I hear what you're saying. Believe it or not, my story is intertwined with that explanation. And I'm thinking that if I tell my story, you will hear it because it is just a story. It is just a story about how my perspective was changed and how I came to understand the difference between capturing a vision of Christ and carrying a vision of Christ. It is that actual transformation that is explained in my process. Um, I think I need to tell my story. I really do. I think I need to tell my story because I think that answers in living, walking, abject lessons what it means to be a Christian and what it's required to be a Christian and how your heart position is supposed to be. Reformation um, is a process of learning Christ. They compare it to a chiropractic adjustment, that it's not about you just understanding and confessing that you know Christ and believing in your heart, but rather it is an adjustment of your internal position, of your heart position, the way you feel about yourself, and perspective, up to what you know about Christ and what you're learning about Christ, which will affect the way you treat other people and the way you look at other people. And I'm hoping that that very abstract definition will become clear when I talk about the way I had to adjust my attitude, because I knew Christ and what Christ taught me along the way. Because he does, when you accept Christ to be your Savior, when you believe, God, I believe that you are the Son of God. Show me your ways. And when you begin to study the Word and learn about Christ, you begin to hear from Christ. You get another voice in your head other than your own. And then you learn how to differentiate what it is that your flesh and your wants and your needs are from what it is that Christ is wanting and needing from you. So my relationship with Christ went through major chiropractic adjustments through my brother Gene and through my relationship with him. And I think if I tell my story and I tell you what Christ, how he adjusted me throughout the story, you will understand what it means to be reformed, to be changed from a religious posture to one that is walking in the ways of Christ, not just knowing about them. So hopefully it'll become clearer. It's better seen than said. So I think if I start by demonstrating that my brother Gene was my oldest brother. He was 17 years older than me, the youngest. When he was about 21 or 22, he decided to move to New York City. And I don't think there was ever a time that I didn't know my brother Gene was gay. Um, not that it was obvious. He was a big buff man, burly guy, but I always knew because my mom always was frank about things. She never had us not understand things. He told me so early about the birds and the bees that some little kid's parents told her to make me stop, explain to 7-year-olds where babies came from because she didn't hide things. And I thought that I was supposed to tell everything I knew. But so, yeah, but so my mom, we just always understood it. It was just always a norm for me. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was 5 years old, he was always a wonderful brother. He gave me a prescription to Dr. Seuss, and I would get all the books, and he would let me talk long distance back when it cost money, reading the books, each book. I know I like green eggs and ham, and he would just praise me to high heaven. I thought it was the biggest thing in the world. Now I realize that was costly, and it probably wasn't all that impressive. But he took time with me. He always made me feel special. That was my brother Gene. Um, I remember when I was 16 and I lost one of my best friends to cancer. And I got so cynical. Just what's the meaning of life? You know how things hit you when you're young. You don't understand what am I striving for? The ceiling could fall in, and why go to college and all this other kind of stuff. And I don't know how long I'm going to live. My brother Gene came down from New York City, would always come in on a train, took me down to the riverfront, and he had this camera taking all these close-ups of me, backdrops and all that sort of thing. Made me feel like a runway model. I wasn't a runway model, but he made me feel very, very special. And he talked to me and he said, "When did you become so cynical?" And I didn't realize that I had, because you can be sitting in the middle of a church and get stuck on something that is so not like Christ and not get corrected because you don't share it with anybody. Your heart can become hardened. Your hope can become dried up. You can just be going through the motions. And that's what was happening. And I can remember at that moment that I started to examine my heart and say, what happened to me? Why did I change? And of course, Christ was in there to show me through his word where I had lost my hope, because I was in the word. He showed me where I had lost my hope. He showed me where that in this life we will have troubles, and that all things were together for our good, that he was in control, and that Marcia was only meant to live for 16 years. That was in his plan. She knew Christ. That was in his plan. I understood that. And I understood from that moment what Christ required of me, truth on the inward parts. And in the hidden parts, he makes you know wisdom. It's not this surface stuff that they just give you, the platitudes that they throw at you. True introspection is where all healing begins. Looking at what's working in you. You don't see what's working in you if you don't have Christ to guide you. You always find something external that you think that you can fix or repair with your own might or in your own mind. But it was Christ that guided me from that place of negativity to a place of positivity. That was my relationship with Christ. But only somebody who's close to you can speak into that place. A stranger can't speak into that place. And I also begin to understand that ministry is relational. You can't talk into somebody's life if you don't really know them, because the first thing that happens is they put up barriers. Get defensive, you don't know them. So how dare you encroach upon that? But my brother Gene had it like that. He was a safe place for me, and I was a safe place for him. And we talked about almost everything, all the time. Talked about almost everything. I remember one day I shared my mom's concern with him. I said, Mom thinks that she did something to make you gay because she was hard on you because you weren't as tough as she wanted you to be, and she thinks that she maybe pushed you over the edge or something. And it was at that point that my brother Gene said, "Oh my God, nothing could be further from the truth." And he shared with me how when he was a younger boy, some older man in the neighborhood actually pulled him into the house and molested him. And all he told my mom was that he was having problems going to the bathroom. It was painful. And my mom took him to the doctor knowing only that. And the doctor just happened to be gay. So the doctor only treated my brother and told him how to take care of himself, to be safe, to not get hurt. So in a sense, he validated what had happened to him. And my brother came out of there and didn't share with my mom what had happened. Just said, okay, well, this is what I have to do going forward, because this is who I am. And so my mother didn't know. And when I shared that story with my mom, it was a good thing that guy was dead, because my mom knew exactly who he was, but it healed her. So I saw healing coming from a place of truth on the inward part. What really happened? It wasn't her, anything she did. What was really the cause? It wasn't her. So it healed their relationship. So Mom got to the place where she said, you know what? I'm tired of Gene coming to the holidays and everybody else has their spouse and he's by himself. Bring your friend with you when you come home for the holidays. I can remember how happy Gene was, because Gene was very respectful. He would bring, I remember my dad said, oh my God, Emma, you open that door and he's going to start wearing dresses in the house. He didn't know what was going to happen, what she was releasing or unleashing. And of course, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. She just opened the door and he would bring his partners home, and they were always respectful. And every picture, they were at different ends of the picture. Gene didn't even want it to look like it was something. I can remember at my wedding, his spouse was at one end of the photograph and he was at the other. Gene would never encroach. He just wouldn't. He was very, very respectful, always. He was just that kind of guy. And he lost his partner in 1994. I remember that. And he never really found anybody that he loved like that again. So he spent a lot of time by himself. And we talked on the phone at least once a week, all the time, talking on the phone. And he knew where I stood in my faith. He knew that what I believed, and that God created man and woman. He created he them, and that to me was the definition of marriage. He knew that. And he respected my belief. He said God knew his heart. He actually thought, my brother Gene thought, that it should be called something else because marriage was something that God sanctified. Here, their union should be called something else that was legalized. That was my brother's belief. That was just his thought. So we had a very good relationship. We knew that where we stood at different ends of the spectrum. We didn't argue about things. We just loved on each other. And he was a person that worried all the time. He was. And so I was thinking, I was like, you know what? I knew that my relationship with Christ, and my brother Gene attended a Catholic church, but I knew that Psalm 46 was my favorite scripture still. That when the mountains crumble and the waters come up, to meet you where you are in that mountain, but there's a place in that mountain that's still, it's called the city of God, where God makes perfect, that God is in that place and she shall not be moved. I knew that there was a way of coming to know Christ that even when your whole world falls apart, you don't. I knew that. I knew that with my relationship with Christ, with that.
Chrissy, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. It's going to be my own little commercial for the She is Still Dope Network. Just to remind people, if they just tuned in, I'm talking with Crissy Wilson, and she is telling the story. This is I Am My Brother's Keeper, Part 1. And in 2 weeks, we'll come back with Part 2. This is a part of the Humble Dialogues podcast, and Chrissy's telling her story of being her brother's keeper, her brother who is gay, and what that means for someone who walks in faith, and what that means for someone who knows God not through rules but through relationship. And Crissy is opening up and sharing her story. I do want to encourage people to um, go to the She is Still Dope network, sheisstilldope.com, to learn all you can. Typically, there's a button that will be out there that you can, a scanner, whatever that thing is called, the scan code, the code you can scan that can bring you in so that you can see. I just want to encourage people because the She is Still Dope network is a global network of some powerful women. And today's show, Humble Dialogues with Crissy Wilson, is probably one of the most powerful you're going to encounter. Uh, Crissy is a powerful force all by herself, and so far she's told so little about herself, and that's a part of her humbleness. And she's telling her story of God, her story of her walk with God through her brother Gene. I Am My Brother's Keeper, Part 1. I'm going to turn it back to Crissy and have you keep telling us your story.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I love talking about him. Okay, so I have two kids. They're 2 years apart. And we lost our kid's dad in a car accident when they were 10 and 12. And single motherhood is not for faint of heart. And not only did I get to graduate from college with my brother Gene sending me as many checks as my dad, but so did my kids. He was the best brother ever. He called me on the phone. He says, "I know you're struggling. I got checks in the mail." My kids thought they were their dad, and he didn't have any kids, and my two kids were treated like they were his own all the time. All the time. Every time I struggled, he was sending something. He was this big, handsome, muscular man who preferred walking in New York. It's easier than driving. One time my transmission went out in my car. He gave me his car until I was able to buy one. Yeah. So anyway, that's the kind of guy he was. Okay, so my kids had graduated from college, and I was working at the Hershey Company at that time, and it was June of 2016, and I hadn't heard from my brother Gene for about a week, which was odd. So I called him, and I didn't get an answer. I thought, well, he must have went away on a trip or something. He's busy. And finally, when I get a call from him, it turns out he's in the hospital, and he had a heart attack and a stroke in a grocery store in New York City, and lost his phone there, and was in the hospital. Now, he didn't have any family in New York, so I told my boss I have to go, and I was on a train to New York City, where I went to go see my brother Gene, pick up his phone and his groceries and all that sort of thing, and get him all situated. He had to go to rehab and all that. Yeah. So it was this back and forth to New York by trains, cars, and however means possible. I had so many friends and family supporting on my trips, and riding along with me, road dogs, for 6 whole months, back and forth to New York City, because my brother Gene was determined to take care of himself. And we argued like brothers and sisters did. I'd come up there. I wanted him to eat right. I was preparing meals and freezing him and cleaning up his apartment and so forth and so on, and taking him back and forth to the doctors. And he was a grown man. He was my older brother and didn't really like me being the boss of him. It was the funniest thing you've ever seen. But after 6 months, his condition continued to degrade. His heart wasn't getting stronger. So he ended up having to wear what they call a Zoe vest. And a Zoe vest is something that will electronically shock your heart and back into rhythm in case it would stop. And his was so weak that that could happen. Still, I'm staying in my own apartment. So it was a snowy Sunday morning, and Lainey Polite, one of our strongest prayer warriors, just happened to be on that trip with me. She was one of my number one road dogs. So getting ready to go home Sunday. Got to go to work the next day. I had been there a whole week. I had taken off because he was in rehab or whatever. And yeah. So at the last minute, Walgreens called to say that they did not have his heart medication. What do you mean you don't have it? Well, they said they look online and they see an inventory in another Walgreens that they do have the heart medication that he needs. I said, okay, Gene, you stay here, get ready to go. I'm getting ready to go. I'm going to go to this other drugstore. I took an Uber to this other drugstore. I get there, and it turns out their inventory was wrong. They didn't have the heart medication either. Call another Walgreens. When they call somebody in Jamaica, Queens, I said, talk to the pharmacist, make sure they have it. Okay, they had it. That was miles away from where I was. I called another Uber, very expensive ride, all the way to Jamaica, Queens. Mind you, it's snowing and it's sleeting, and I'm not ready for snow and sleet. I have sneakers on. So it takes me way across town to Jamaica, Queens. And when it stops, I said, I don't see a Walgreens here. This is Church's Chicken or something. Turns out I had put the wrong address in my phone. I said, oh my goodness, could you take me on another trip? This is where I need to go. He said, no, I got another call. Put me out. I said, well, at least tell me what direction, where is this Walgreens? He said, just a couple of miles down, straight on the same street. It's actually a couple of miles down in another direction. So he put me out of his Uber, and I'm walking, and it's snowing and sleeting, and I'm in sneakers, and I got a boil that's making it painful for me to walk. And you would think that I was the children of Israel with the boils in epical biblical proportion, the way I was complaining about this one thing. God, I cannot believe this. Every time I walk, it's horrible. I'm walking and I'm crying. And I guess I'm halfway there when I'm stopped to rest. I just stopped to rest because it was so painful. And I'm complaining to God because I'm like, why is it so hard? And why won't he come home with me? I can't believe it. And I look up at bawling, and I'm in front of a church. And I hear God say, it's not about you. Okay, now I'm laughing and crying at the same time. I said, God, you got a sense of humor. It's not about me. It's about my brother Gene. Okay, so I get my second wind, and I walk down to this other Walgreens. And mind you, my phone is dying. Yeah, so I walk down to this Walgreens. They have the medication. I'm very, very glad. I call another Uber, and my phone is just about dead when it arrives. Oh, my God. So I get into this, and hours have passed. I mean, over 2 hours it had taken me to run around and do this in the snow. I'm soaking wet. I'm cold. I get into this Uber, and this Uber driver is very, very depressed. He's talking about how disillusioned he was with life and how people used him. I said, oh, my God, what a moment. I ministered to that young man the entire time. And I kept hearing in my head God saying, it's not about you. It's about the ministry. It's about what I represent. I've been bought and paid for. When you're a Christian, it's not about you. It's about what you're doing. It's about what you bring. It's about the salt and light that you have when you can get yourself out of the way. Okay. When I ministered to this young man, I'm telling you, I was just like, wow, it's all about this. This is what it's all about. I'm happy by the time I get back to my brother's apartment. When I get back to the apartment, he's sitting there and he's packed. Okay. Lady Pearlie had been praying the entire time. It turned out that he has to change the Zoe battery in his Zoe vest every 48 hours or it dies. And his stroke had caused him to lose some fine motor dexterity in his hands. He couldn't change it. And he dropped and lost one. So he only had one. He couldn't find it. When we moved his apartment years later. I found it behind the radiator. I think an angel threw it behind there so he couldn't find it. He couldn't find it, and he couldn't change it. He realized that he was going to die there by himself. He said, I guess I can go. I packed a bag for a little while until I get stronger. And Laney mouthed, I've been praying. So it took 3 hours for God to change his mind. That's why I was out of the way. That's what God did. Got his arguing sister out of the way so he could work with my brother, because it wasn't about me. It was about him. Now I'm elated. He's coming home with me. Finally, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, I finally get to do something for him. He hated when everything I did. I mean, I'll get to do more for him. He's been the best brother ever. But I realized that even God was humbling him, because humility is the only posture, that the way you can go before God. He was humbling him and he was humbling me. No flesh saw glory in my presence. That's what God says. None. Yeah. So I get him home, and it was humbling for him. My brother was a fiber optic engineer, and here he couldn't change the battery in his Zoll Best Pack. It was humbling for him. He couldn't do it. Didn't have the dexterity. Just wasn't for him to do. Get him home, and I can remember he got a simple cold and got so weak that he couldn't go up the stairs anymore. And some church members came from my church after a Wednesday night service and set up a bedroom downstairs for him. And they stayed till after midnight. And we had a hospital bed that my parents had in the basement. And it was so nice for him. And my brother James was just sitting there, and I looked at him, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, I didn't realize people were this nice. Okay, so he's seen the love of Christ. He's seen selfish things, that he never thought he'd need, but he loved it, and he loved the love that we have one for the other. And the Bible says that the only thing that the world will see is the love that we have for each other. That's all that that's what he saw.
So,
Yeah.
Chrissy, I'm going to interrupt you one more time, and this is the end of part one of I Am My Brother's Keeper, part one on the Humble Dialogues podcast for the She Is Still Dope and So Is He network. I want to encourage people to visit the She Is Still Dope network at sheisstilldope.com to turn back in for part two of the I Am My Brother's Keeper on the Humble Dialogues podcast. And I am your host today, LJ Fountain, with our amazing guest, Crissy Wilson, telling the story of her life with her brother, Gene, and all that God showed her through that love. I look forward to joining you in 2 weeks. Stay tuned.